and their CNPLC, California Native Plant Landscaping Certificate Program. I've taught at the college level. I used to teach for Bancroft Garden. That's kind of it. That's the gist. Okay, so why don't I just take this on? Is there any housekeeping you need, Anne Marie?
I
Nope.
think we
Okay.
did all the housekeeping.
All right. Housekeeping over. Okay, there we go. In this talk, now I have like just under an hour to get through a lot. It's a bit of a fire hose, but this is a very kind of basic conceptual level. And one of the things I think is, for me, the most meaningful about doing this particular talk is that when I started out, you go to school, you learn horticulture. I wanted to be a landscape architect, got that degree, did all those things. I didn't really learn soil. I knew bupkis about soil. They gave me a textbook about soil, but like, and I guess I passed my class. I don't remember any of it. And it didn't have any meaning for like the first years of my career. But as I've gotten to understand the meaning, the purpose, what's the point of soil, I'm also noticing how very little we really talk about what the point is and why we should know about soil. And I'm sure some of you have been to other soils talks and seen like the pyramid and all that stuff, and you'll see it here today too. But as many of those kinds of talks as I've been to, I didn't click until I started trying to figure it out so that it could be part of educational things that I was doing. And Anne Marie and I've been working together for maybe a decade, just short of a decade. And I'm finally like, this is like one of the most important things, but I don't feel like it gets its due. So we're going to talk about what soil is, what healthy soil is and does. We're going to be jumping around a little bit because it's hard to talk about a subject and not be like, oh yeah, and this thing, and the, oh, but that affects that. And like kind of be a little bit circular. I'm going to try not to because I hate repeating myself, but sometimes it really is important to bring it back to the main point. The main point being life supports life. Healthy soil is alive, it has living things in it, and it supports our plants. And that's very, very basic, but that's the big point. If you get nothing else out of here, soil is a living thing. So soil is, it's mineral particles. There's little bits of sand, silt, or clay. There's organic material, which can be decaying roots or leaf litter. It can be dead bugs. It can be all kinds of things that can biodegrade or decay. It also has, and this is critical, pore space for air, gas exchange. So they call that soil respiration, so that gases can be exchanged like carbon dioxide and oxygen, and for water to go through it. If there's no pore space for the water to go through, then it won't. So like I said, soil's alive. We're going to feed the life in the soil. And I like to remember that by remembering that the life in the soil has soul. Whether you believe that like theologically or not, I don't care. But the soul in the soil is a reminder that it's a living thing. And then those living things in the soil, they break down nutrients, they break down leaves, they break down minerals, they break down each other, and they provide nutrients. They're kind of like little stomachs. They sort of pre-digest a whole lot of stuff and provide that in a way that's able to be taken up by the root systems for the plants. And then you're less stressed out plants because they're being provided with the nutrients and they have room for water and air, oxygen, gas exchange. They're healthier plants. So if we're taking care of our soil, we are absolutely taking care of our plants because the soil's going to do a better job than we ever could. And if it's healthy, they can be healthy. So I've seen this too many times and I've heard it too many times. They'll be like, oh, soil's just like a sponge. There's like one thing that soil and sponges have in common, and that's those little tiny air pockets. That's it. That's all there is. But that's my hand, by the way. As soon as I let go of that sponge, if I had squished it down, you know exactly what's going to happen. It's going to pop back up. It's going to go back to its original form, and soil is absolutely not going to do that. Not ever, no way, no how. So those pores are really the only thing a sponge has anything in common with soil. That's it. The compaction problem is a big, big problem because if we think soil is like a sponge and it's just going to pop back up and everybody's happy, we're kidding ourselves, and we are hurting our environment and our soils and therefore our plants. So I love an analogy. I love my sponges, but that's not the one I would like to use. I made up an imperfect analogy. Advance. Soil is more like a neighborhood. If you squish it, it won't pop back up. But it needs that infrastructure to provide for the living things. So it needs nutrients or food, organic and inorganic. It needs air. It needs that soil respiration. It needs water. It needs all the life support stuff. Then those soil beings, the critters, the microorganisms, all the things living in the soil, including plant roots, which have a symbiotic relationship with those living beings, they not only pre-digest all kinds of wonderful things and provide that in a form that the plants can take up, but the plants then send exudates down their root system and provide that to the living things in the soil to enjoy. So it's mutual. It's not just a one-way street. Everybody's giving a little, taking a little, and so forth. But you can't live like this if you're compacted. And if you think soil's like a sponge and is going to pop, it's not. And once it gets squished, it's squished. That air and water pore space, those little pockets where air can have gas exchange and water can flow through and all of that can support the life, isn't coming back. So compacted soil has those spaces. They've been smashed out. The air is squished out. There's no room for water to move. Can you undo that damage like rototilling and so forth? The hint is right there on your screen. Absolutely not. We humans are not going to uncompact a soil because those pores are teeny tiny and just breaking it up isn't going to do it. So we have an obligation and a duty, you might say, to prevent that damage instead to as much as we can. So I'm sure everyone here has walked on like a turf grass field, like a soccer field or a playground or something. And when it's wet, when it's super saturated, it's just been raining or the sprinklers have been running, it's squishy and you hear that and it's all squishy. Some of that's the grass. Some of that is squishing out the pores in the soil. And we should not be working the soils when they're wet because we want to avoid squishing those little tiny spaces out. And so we want to avoid compacting. If you're going to run heavy equipment over something, you should be running it over a surface like plywood that's going to protect that soil. I recently made a big mistake at my house. I had workers over replacing some windows and they just trampled all through my yard right after a rain, squashed all the plants down to bits. And now I have a path that I'm going to have to try to remediate. And I'm not going to uncompact it. I can't, but I can help it not be so damaged. The average adult human footfall is 8 pounds per square inch. Then measure that by how much inches you've got in your little foot and think about every footfall bringing that kind of like a hammer. So you walk on it once, it's compacted at 8 pounds per square inch. Do it again, it compacts a little bit more. And you're just going down bit by bit by bit. And so now I want to tell you in my head, I think of this as the quail story. It's the roots recharge story. So I was watching a video of this dude at Bamberger Ranch, which is in Texas. And he was talking about how they have this acreage out there in the hill country, and they planted all these, prairie plants with long roots. And isn't it wonderful because it recharged the aquifers? And I'm like, but how? He kept talking about, look at these wonderful grasses, these recharge the aquifers. And I'm thinking, okay, I see roots. Roots uptake water, they give it to the leaves, that evapotranspires into the air. How is that recharging the aquifer in the other direction? I did not get it. I was just like, what? So I Googled it and I found this group of Bob White and quail enthusiasts who wrote a blog post about what he's talking about. And I was like, oh, duh. So here's what happens. Say a plant sends some roots down through the soil. And look at this picture. It's got these big roots that are going to be more powerful and these little skinny feeder roots. Those little roots are going to go through and between those parts of the soil. So organic matter, mineral particles, whatever's down there, they're going to go through and forge a little tunnel between those pieces. They're going to force their way through. And then they're not forever. So these roots, not only while they're there, work as a capillary action or like a straw or whatever, they're tunneling through and creating opportunity for space to exist. But then when that root dies and is replaced with another root, because they're not forever. So these roots will eventually be replaced with new roots and other new roots and other new roots, and older roots, just like leaves, will get abandoned. If you look at any plant, that leaf that you're looking at is not forever. It will eventually be replaced by another leaf. Even if it's evergreen, each individual leaf isn't forever. And the same goes for roots. So these roots are digging little paths down. As a root dies and decomposes, it leaves behind organic material, and the water and the air and everything can kind of follow that track. And then the soil can become less compacted. I don't make any expectation that it's going to go back to its natural, untromped on state. But that's how soil can get uncompacted or improved at this tiny little level that we humans just don't have the ability to do on our own. So it takes time, it takes living things. Then as other microorganisms and things are allowed back into compacted soil, they're doing the same thing. And so not tilling is important, but I wanted to kind of bring that up because there's a lot of people like, oh, I have compacted soil, and they just uncompact it by rototilling, and that's not really a healthy thing for the soil. So I'm going to get back to that in a minute, but I want to kind of go down another road. So soil texture is defined by the USDA, and it's based on the size of the mineral particles. This has nothing to do with how much organic material there is. This is only the minerals. So that's not something that you change. That's geology that was provided to you by the planet. So you might have sand particles, sand-sized particles. Those are the big kahunas. You can imagine like really big marbles. The spaces between sand particles are going to be bigger. And so water and air will flow through faster. Silt is much smaller. And so those spaces between pieces of silt will also be smaller, as if they were just smaller marbles. Clay is a little bit different. Clay is the tiniest one of all, but it's built in a way that's kind of like a wet ream of paper. It's a little wiggly, it's a little layered, and it has the ability, the capacity, because of all that surface area with all those layers, it has the capacity to hold more water than the other two kinds can, and more nutrients than the other two kinds can. But it also has an ability to hold on to water and nutrients so tightly that the plants need help, like kind of getting that back. So if we've all heard, I'm sure many of you in here have heard this business about, oh, particle size and sand and clay, but so what? So this is where, for me, I had to work to find the connections, and if they told me in school, I don't remember. So the whole point of this is that these particle sizes behave differently when they make up your soil, or at least they're that ingredient of the soil, the mineral part of the ingredients. And so they impact how you would design your irrigation, because they impact how quickly or slowly water can infiltrate through the soil and drain through the soil. It impacts your plant selection. It impacts your nutrient availability. There's like this mix of what kinds of minerals you have that can impact the chemical nature of that soil, and also how organic material biodegrades. So it's a big thing, and it's important to know what you have. So here's that dreaded pyramid that, just says, oh, these are all these soil types, and it has way too many lines on it. So if you look real heavily at this, or maybe not so heavily, in the corners, you'll see up at the top, it says clay. That's this big chunk at the top. Bottom right, it says silt. Bottom left says sand in the corner. And then you'll notice all those words in between say sandy clay loam, sandy loam, silt loam, clay loam. None of this has anything to do with organics. Zip zero nada. So loam here means it's a mix. So it's a mix of sand and clay, or a mix of silt and sand, or whatever it is. It's just a mix. The one right kind of bottom center middle just says loam, and that's going to be more of an even mixture and have all three particle sizes. So they're all represented. So you could do a deep, deep dive on this and go totally crazy. But what's important about it, whoa, wait, hang on. What's important about that is that this is only the mineral particles. And so a lot of people use the word loam, but they're not talking about this. They're like, oh, I have loamy soil. And what they mean is they actually have some organic material in the soil, or maybe they mean that their soil is very loose. I've heard it used a lot of different ways. It's not what it's supposed to mean. So if you're having a conversation about soil, you want to get real specific and know what your soil is made of and how it's going to behave. And so that's that one piece of the pie. So we've kind of talked about the pore space for air and water. We've talked here about the mineral sizes. Now I want to get to the organics part. So what about the organics? The organics can be decayed leaves. It can be old abandoned roots, twigs, etc. It can come from compost. It can be, this is one of my favorite words, other soil. So soil organisms, just like roots or leaves, they're not forever. They die. They're still down there. Other things are going to eat them, and they become necromatter. Or they could be something else under the ground that maybe the pest control guy left behind. It can be all of those things. It can be really anything that biodegrades. It can be cotton underpants if you want it to be. Okay, so in the soil, we've got these two main ingredients that go along with the pore space. The mineral materials are pretty easy to understand. They come from geological things like rocks and whatever. We've got sand, silt, and clay. If you think about this, though, the organic material, if you were to take these two images here, which one's going to hold on to water? Which one's going to hold on to that, hold on to nutrients, be a little bit more absorbent, if you will? That's going to be the organic material. So more organic material in your soil makes water more available to your plants and for longer periods of time, because that organic material is just more absorbent than these, say, rocks over here on the left. And I'm way oversimplifying this, but I think this is something that gets missed a lot, is like we keep saying, and in fact, I've taught this, oh, organic material holds more water and makes nutrients more plant available. But why? And I never explained it. No, so now I am. So you can imagine that, and it's a very intuitive thing to understand, right? And then we have soil structure. So this is where that life in the soil comes back and starts messing with us again. So we've got the minerals, we've got some organic material, but the life in the soil, if you've ever stuck a shovel in the ground and pulled it up, it comes up in big blocks, or maybe not big blocks, maybe tiny blocks. Maybe it's just sand and it just falls off right away. However it holds together or doesn't hold together is the structure of that soil. And so because of the life in the soil, the way that that blocks apart is called PEDs. So this guy here is holding a PED, and tilling to break these things apart is not beneficial. It is not usually needed unless you have a very specific circumstance where it's actually necessary because you don't have time to wait for the soil and other treatments to remediate compaction or something else. So, excuse me. Tilling is usually not needed, especially if you've got time. If you can take a little time, then for most, I mean, I'm not talking about like building an apartment building and having to do anything there, but for most gardens, most landscapes, you don't really need to break it up. Here's some of what is important about that. So soil has naturally formed over however many years, eons, whatever, in soil horizons. So you can see there's like this grassy stuff at the top in this image. And then it looks to my eye like there's more organic material up there towards the top, and then some random rocks or trash or something. And then it gets into this dark brown, very organic looking layer, changes to something else, and then it changes to something else. And really, that's why I picked this photo. It's from somewhere in the UK. But it shows those horizons so beautifully, I had to use it. So tilling would mix this up to whatever blade depth you were using on the rototiller. It will also run over all this with heavy wheels, it's heavy equipment, and it will continue to compact the soil. Then tilled soil makes that soil more vulnerable to compaction. So if you're tilling to uncompact soil, one, you're not really uncompacting it. And two, you're making it more vulnerable to compaction in the future. So, and we care about that because, now, let me tell you, if there's one thing that's difficult to find, it's an image of soil microorganisms in their layers. So I went with the ocean. The soil organisms, worms all the way down to fungus and little amoebas and things, they live at different levels in the soil, just like organisms in the ocean do. There's all those soil horizons will have different things living there. And it's also kind of brings me back to the neighborhood. Everybody has their place, right? So if we don't till, then everybody gets to be where they want to be. Their little apple carts aren't upended. They're not flipped over or turned upside down or torn apart. And their depth defined, or yeah, depth. Their depth defined habitat, you can think of them as underground ecologies, are left in place, and everybody's happy. They're all allowed to be what they want to be and be where they want to be and do the thing that they do. And so we want that because we want our soil to be healthy, we want it to be happy, and we want all those things to be where they want to be. So what do I get out of it? If I do all this work, I want some, you know, I'm fighting for the life in the soil. What am I going to get? I want it to be healthy. I want it to be diverse. It needs food, organic and mineral. It needs the pore space. It needs, in fact, some of those other things that we would think of as undesirable, like other pathogens, because some of the life in the soil eats them and they need food too. So if you think about it, that diversity is super, super important. Then we get our benefits. Now it's my turn. I get what I want. So healthy soil is going to do all kinds of wonderful things for you. Soil, the real deal with life in it and everything. And I'm not talking about stuff that came out of a bag. Soil that's been there long enough to have living things growing there and doing their job improves the soil texture. It provides nutrients to the plants. It can kill, eat, and outcompete pathogens and each other. And it can break down pollutants in the soil and in water that's in the soil. So you could have runoff that has contaminants in it. It goes into the soil. A healthy soil will break that apart to things that are less toxic or to totally denature them. It can break down and neutralize, so to speak, contaminants, fertilizers, too much fertilizer sometimes, but sometimes the too much fertilizer just kills them. It can help with remediating heavy metals, pesticides, runoff. So things like motor oil and air pollution, all that stuff that might wash in there. It can do all those things. And it has that mutually symbiotic relationship with the plants. So now we've got the plants are helping to keep the life in the soil happy. The life in the soil is making the soil itself less contaminated. It's opening up all those little pore spaces for air and water. It's giving those roots a much more habitable place to go diving through. And we want our plant roots to go as deep as they possibly can on their own so that we are sequestering more carbon. Every root that goes down into the soil and digs through is taking its little carbon-based life form self with it. And it's depositing carbon in the soil. And that carbon becomes some of the food for all the life in the soil. It's this whole big merry-go-round of mutually symbiotic stuff. And so those roots go down into the soil, the life is supporting that, everybody's happy. Healthy soil will make the water and the nutrients more plant available. So like I said earlier, when I was talking about clay soil and the clay particles being like a ream of paper that got wet and kind of wiggly and a little bit layered, that can hold on to water pretty tight and make it difficult for plants, even if the water or the moisture in the soil is measurable by like a laboratory. Those plants may not be able to pull it out to drink it, and it may be held so tightly that it's just not there for them. But the life in the soil and healthy soil will help make that more plant available if it's clay particles, or it will help hold on to water because it's organic material and because we have this healthy soil, it'll hold on to it more so that it doesn't just drain through or evaporate off or whatever. It can protect the soil from wind or water erosion. If you imagine soil that's just dead is going to not hold together in those beds. It's not going to stick together. It's not going to be a nice, happy community that looks out for each other. And those mineral particles can blow away or wash away. And the organic material and the life in the soil can help hold everything together and keep it kind of pulled together. That in a way that the minerals can't do on their own. And so all of these things protect the health of your plants. So now soil testing is something that I am a huge fan of. Huge. I think you should know and not guess about what's going on with your soil. If you want to know what those soil particle sizes are, or if there's a specific mix in there, you can do all kinds of home tests like the jar test and the ribbon test and whatever. But I'm a big fan of sending it off to really know what's going on. And so I've heard people say, oh, yellow leaves mean this. Well, maybe, but if you don't know for sure, then you can do a lot of damage. So it could be that yellow leaves, as an example, are seasonal color, a disease process, so a reaction to a pest, a nutrient deficiency, or a nutrient overabundance with over fertilizing. Could be stress, a response to drought stress or some other stress. Could be dog pee or any other kind of contaminant, and the plant is showing you that it's displeased, or maybe it's just fine in its fall. So I would want to know if I have a plant that shouldn't be turning yellow and it is turning yellow, I might want to investigate that and find out. I'm not going to assume something. And when you do soil testing, you want to do it from multiple spots. I wouldn't just pick one spot, dig some stuff out and send it off. I would pick an area where, let's say you have a backyard, I would pick the soil from multiple places. And if the places are different, then send them in as separate samples and see if they're really very different from each other, like where the conditions are different. Say one is very far from the house, one is very close to the house. Those might have very different things going on. You want to dig the soil down from below the surface, not at the surface, so that you get down to where the roots are going to be. You need to tell the lab what you intend to grow. Not all soil labs will prompt you for that information. And you also want to fill out the form. I do this for clients. I'll fill the form out for the lab because I want to make sure that I get everything filled out. I'm not just going to hand it to somebody and be like, here, fill this out. I want to make sure we've got it all and everything's buttoned up. The lab knows what we're trying to grow. The lab knows what we're looking for. We talk about what tests we need. And then I'm going to ask the lab for organic recommendations only because I don't want to use synthetic fertilizers. And I'm going to get to that in a sec. So this is a little snippet from a lab that I had done at Waypoint Analytical, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. And so they can tell you, there's lots of different kinds of tests, but they can tell you what the nutrients are in the soil, how much organic material there were. They can test for, some labs can test for pathogens, some labs can test for specific plant pathogens. You can send them in plant parts. You can get your recommendations back in just whatever generic recommendations they want to give you, or you can ask for organic only. This lab will tell you what to use for backfill. So what kinds of amendments they suggest for the plants you're planting when you're planting them. And then they'll give you suggestions for future maintenance on an ongoing basis. And you should still retest every once in a while. That's really helpful to know. So nutrients, you're starting to catch on, I'm sure. We're not going to feed that plant. We're feeding the soil instead. We're going to keep the soil healthy. So let the soil feed the plant. Let the soil take care of that. We don't have to use fertilizers and do all kinds of craziness unless the soil is deficient. So we want to test and find out if the soil is deficient in something or not. Don't add stuff you don't need. I wouldn't take a medication that my doctor didn't say I needed. I just be like, why? Okay, so this is a little chart that kind of explains all the stuff I've been saying, but graphically. So synthetic fertilizers are formulated to dissolve and go straight into the roots, be root uptakeable, boom, you're done. Who cares about the soil? But if we use organic fertilizers on the left and we're feeding the soil, then we're helping the organic matter and the soil nutrients and the microorganisms all break this stuff down. And then it's the soil that supports the plant, which also helps that plant actually grow better roots and go deeper and do all the things it needs to do because it's being supported in a way that's not just like, I don't know, popping steroids instead of eating a meal. So the problems with synthetic fertilizers, notwithstanding that they're really designed just to feed the plant and not keep soil healthy, is that they can kill the life in the soil, and that's totally shooting ourselves in the foot. They can also leach out of the soil before the plant ever has a chance to use them. It can leach into groundwater, it runs off, it can pollute our waterways and our oceans and creeks and things, and it's harmful. I had a client who had a gardener who, right after we installed this little potty area for their dog, the gardener went out and put something that looked like this stuff all over the yard. The dog went out on with wet grass or wet feet or something, picked up a bunch of this stuff on his little feet and ingested it and then was sick. And nobody needs that. I don't need children running around barefoot on this stuff. I don't want to run around on this stuff. I don't want wildlife touching this stuff. So I would use organic only. So then we come to the uncomfortable part of what are organic fertilizers and amendments made out of? How do you know if what you're looking at on a bag of stuff amendment is organic or not? It's usually pretty obvious. There's a lot of fancy words out there that mean that it's an organic thing, and then you'll have to like Google them on your phone before you leave the store. But bone meal, pretty obvious. It's ground up bones. Feather meal, blood meal, alfalfa meal. These are all pretty obvious things. The wonderful part about this is that we're taking stuff that would otherwise be a waste product and we're using it in a useful way, like coffee grounds and eggshells and other green waste, manure. So it's when I look at my little feathered friends down there, it's not a happy thought that I'm going to grind them up and give them to my soil if it needs it, but it's kind of intuitive. Singing Frogs Farm does a fantastic job of using these principles for their healthy soil. They outproduce produce, actually. They outproduce produce with there's all these farms around them and they just totally outdo them, everybody. They avoid synthetics. They're going to work with their soil, avoiding compaction. These guys are constantly talking about no-till. We want to avoid transmitting diseases, and healthy soil by predation will help kill diseases and make sure that they're not moving around. Compost and mulch are part of that. I got to hustle to get through the end of this deck because I took a little time earlier. So compost is usually used on the top. We call that top dressing. There's a big panic out there in some circles where, oh God, if mulch gets in my planting hole, and you never bury mulch, it's not that big a deal. It'll eventually biodegrade, and any nitrogen that it had absorbed for the biodegrading process will be released back into the soil soon enough. So I don't panic about that. It protects the soil, just like I said. Compost is organic material that can be top dressed if you want. Great, go ahead, put it on the top, and the life in the soil will come get it. Or you can incorporate it. It is a human man-made process where we have controlled the decomposition of organic material by letting it increase to certain temperatures, keeping it aerated, and turning it over and making sure it's got enough moisture. Very, very controlled process of decomposition that speeds everything up. And it's fully broken down. It shouldn't look like leaves. It shouldn't look like twigs. So it should be fully broken down and not smell funky. It should smell nice. And then that can help feed the soil more organic material. So mulch, like I said, top dressed, don't stress. We can still tell what it was. It helps suppress leaves. It's a protective layer to keep moisture in the soil. It protects the soil surface from erosion, and it keeps the temperatures in the soil from being too wild. In MWELO, if that's something that comes into your world and it's a state ordinance for water efficiency, you're required to use mulch on exposed surfaces, except things like turf and ground covers and seed beds where it wouldn't be appropriate. Then inorganic mulches are often used in dry garden applications because they're trying not to add a lot of organic material. They're trying not to hold moisture in the soil as long. So they don't retain as much water. They heat up more. They compact the soil, which is very unfortunate. They don't add a lot of nutrients to the soil. And they can be really expensive and heavy. And then they're harvested in an intense, environmentally impactful way. And weed fabrics do not work. They're inappropriate. They're expensive. They're a pain. They're bad for soil. So bad for your soil and bad for the environment. They don't allow nutrients to cycle through the soil. They don't allow water to go through even when they say they do. And they don't support healthy soil. And then roots have a tendency to grow right under the surface of them because the soil is so bad. So these are a bad idea no matter what, no matter what. Compost now is top trusted, or it can be incorporated into the soil. It should be fully broken down. It should not look like that picture. It's human controlled, and we're feeding the soil so that the soil feeds the plants. Okay, so I got this question recently. Do I put compost in the planting hole? Now, MWELO says you need to make sure to pass MWELO's regulations that you're getting 6% organic material. But that may or may not be appropriate for the plants you're using. And so then you would have to navigate that process of saying, I'm using plants that want less organic material, so I'm not going to do that, and manage to work that way out. But the incorporation to my mind, if I'm digging a planting hole, it's incorporated. It's going in the planting hole with the backfill. So I'm not going to worry about like digging it in all over the place, especially if there's any plants that I'm saving. I don't want to tear up those root systems. Okay, so native California native plants, we're finally here at the plant part. They have soils that they're adapted to, sometimes because their plant community happens to live in a certain place that has certain ingredients. So those ingredients, like the organic material, what kinds of organic material are that? Is it pine needles or apple leaves or what is it? And the minerals that are specific to there, what kinds of rocks are those? Those all make for very different soils all throughout the state. And so it could be that you have a plant community that's specific to a certain kind of soil, a certain location, very, very highly preferential, right? It could be because of the location. The percentage of organic material is variable. Some plants are more fussy than others and really need something specific, and others are just like, whatever. Their soil preference might not be a soil requirement. So you want to do a little digging and see what's going on. So I went to Calscape and found a random plant. I don't even remember what I looked up, but if you keep scrolling down, you'll see the needs for sun, drainage, water, soil description. That's fantastic. Do you know how hard that is to find on any other plant? The fact that they've got this, I don't know if it's on every plant, but I think that's amazing. And then, does my native plant want compost? I don't know. One, we need to know what your plant is. Two, we need to know what your soil is like. Is it like a wildland area and you want to put a plant there? Or is this a disturbed site? Has it been developed? Is it a suburb? It's urban? Is it compacted? All of those things play into what that soil has now. So even if this plant in the picture is native to your part of the world, it doesn't mean that it wants to live in your soil just yet. It might be that your soil's been damaged, hurt, polluted, whatever. And you may want to look into that first, and then pick plants that want what you have. So I wouldn't pick a plant that requires clay soil if I'm living near the beach and I have sandy soil to offer. The fact that I love that plant isn't going to make it love my soil. So then you want to check Calscape. If Calscape doesn't have the answer, Google stuff or email them and make sure that Anne-Marie gets that email. Just, I'm here for you. So final thought, I'm going to repeat myself once again. The healthy soil is going to keep your plants healthy. And it's so specific to where you are, what plants you're growing, and what's happened in history. And if you support the system and work with it, it's all going to be okay. So then, Anne-Marie, do we have questions?
We have questions, and I want to preface some of it with saying every question, every good question's real answer is it depends.
I know.
Do native
It's
plants,
so frustrating.
a lot of people think native plants don't need any soil amendments. They don't need water. All those things are true if you are in your native environment, in your native watershed, in their native habitat. However, Jennifer's got a landscape that has been developed and redeveloped for probably close to 100 years, and it appears that they buried all of the trash of the building of the houses around it in the yard.
Yes, I live on a slope that's very terraced, And, I mean, I bought the house, moved in, and then started trying to garden. And I'm pulling out nails and bottles and tiles and like all kinds of crap. So I live near open space, but my garden has nothing to do with those soils.
So yeah, the
Yeah.
answer is it depends. And that it depends can go, we're going to try and get through a lot of these.
Yeah.
And I want to really quick steal Jennifer's share and show just a couple of resources that people should know about real
Okay.
fast.
I stopped the share for you.
Great.
It's a service I provide.
All right. You
Yeah.
should be seeing a piece from Las Politas Nursery. Las
Yes.
Politas, if you don't know them, is a nursery on the Central Coast. They do amazing science. And here is a whole thing from them on soils. And particularly, somebody had asked about serpentine soils, which are a special, particular kind of soil. And if you have them, if you have serpentine soils, it's a special thing to work with. But there's a whole list of plants that tolerate serpentine soils in Las Politas Nursery. You can also, I just want to call out, go into Cowscape. You can put in, where you are. And you can also, one of the things that you have the ability to do is put in your soil drainage, which is kind of a thing for, your soil type. I am right now in Cazadero, I am in fairly fast draining soil because I'm along a creek, and it will pull it down to plants that work with that type of soil. Because I'm going to stop share, but you can improve your soil, but you have to work with the soil that you have. So
Yes.
we are going to slam through the last few minutes of questions.
Yeah, I
And
just answered two that were in the chat while you were talking
great.
because I'm
Uh,
distractible.
is bone meal good fertilizer for native plants?
Wait, say it again.
Is bone meal good fertilizer for native plants?
Depends. Does your soil deprived of what bone meal provides? Because if not, then you don't need more. If it's not depleted in those minerals, then you don't need to add them. So if it comes back from a soil test as a recommendation, then sounds like um then it sounds like you do need it. But one of the things that drives me bonkers is not knowing what's going on with your soil, not having had it tested, and then like going to the garden center, like a certain parental figure I have, and saying, what should I do? And they just go, oh, here, whoops, buy this. And he does. And he's like, problem solved. They don't know anything about his soil. They don't know him. They don't know what's there. They don't know if he just poured gasoline on it yesterday and can't figure out why his plants died. They have no idea. But they go, here, buy this box. It'll fix all your problems. And he goes away happy.
And bone meal is got a lot of micronutrients. It's got
Mm-hmm.
phosphorus, it's got magnesium, zinc, iron, those type of things. So
Yeah,
if your plants need that, it's
right.
what you're looking for in it.
So
Okay.
I'm sorry. Here's a great example of kind of a different side of that same coin. If you have plants that are, say, from New Zealand, they don't want a lot of phosphorus. You cannot assume that all plants have the same nutritional requirements. You
Mhm.
can kill bearded irises by giving them nitrogen and it rots their rhizome. So knowing your soil is one thing, but we're not amending our soil for some national standard. We're amending it so that that kind of soil for where you are is healthy. And then if amendments or other fertilizers are needed, that's for the plants. But if the plants are going to be harmed by an excess of phosphorus, like plants from New Zealand would be, then don't be doing that thinking that they're just all the same, that everybody has the same nutritional needs, because they don't.
All
That's when
right.
I would go to Cowscape, look up a plant, see what kind of soil it prefers, talk to your lab about what you want to grow, and do a little digging on that. Digging.
Okay.
Yeah.
Best home soil testing kits and any recommendations for soil testing labs that
Yeah,
you
the soil testing lab that was in my thing was, what was it? What? Oh God, I've already forgotten it. Hang on. Where's my brain? I get my testing done at
Waypoint, somebody remember.
Waypoint Analytical. And I love them
For the win
because
to people
they're,
listening.
I love Waypoint because they're very helpful on the phone. They'll answer questions. And they put prompts on their form for what kind of plants are you trying to grow and stuff like that. And yeah, so that's why I use them. They're also here in California.
So we've got a question on learning to grow in places like the high desert where you end up with very sandy soils, a lot of hillsides, and figuring out how to grow natives in there in this type of new soil. And I think the answer is the same for a lot of these different types of soils. You
Hmm.
have to find the soil, the plants that likes that soil.
Yeah,
Um, if you have
yeah,
soil that has been destroyed, kind of thing, if
yeah,
it's had all of its nutrients pulled out of it for some reason, if it's been turned over, then you need to feed it enough until you have soil and not just dirt.
yeah. I
But
once had a client with a house in San Francisco, very urban, very dense part of the town. And we did some soil testing. You know, they had like a patio out front for the longest time. They moved in, they renovated the house, whatever. And then they start tearing stuff out in the yard. And we thought, you know, we should do some soil testing because I always push that, right? I want to know and not just make a guess or put some plants in the ground only to find out that there's something wrong. And we found so many gross chemicals and contaminants under the paving that I'm assuming somebody just like in the construction of whatever era that patio is from that they just poured their like paint thinner out. I don't know, but it was it was disgusting. So we were able to fix that, remediate it, work with it, and make sure we're not putting our investment of these plants into something that's not going to be healthy for them. It took a little time, but you know, that's worth it for me.
if you're on a hillside and you've got everything's pretty steep and you're trying to feed it and your things aren't sticking and you're having problems,
Yeah.
and you need to, if you're feeding the soil and that's what it needs, try instead of compost, try compost tea.
So compost tea, I am not the expert on it. I will fully admit I'm not the expert. I have a book that I love that's something like demystifying or myth busting for the gardener, something like that. It's a little book. Um, and they like demystified, you know, when you get those packets of mycorrhizal fungi and it's like some dust in a Ziploc baggie, they demystified that. And I was like, oh, because they were saying there's millions of species of mycorrhizal fungi. Who's to say that whoever put together this baggie of dust got the ones that your soil will support? And I went, duh, like, of course. So I want to keep my soil healthy. The fungi, the mycorrhizae, all that stuff will come. Um,
Well, and the
what was the
mycorrhizal
other?
fungi, when you're digging in under soil and you see all that white stuff,
Yes, that's
that's
good
your
stuff.
that's your mycorrhizal fungi. And so that's part of why you don't want to till or to
Yeah,
tear up the soil. You don't want to till
I
it, you
don't
don't
want
want
that.
to turn it, you don't want to do those things, is because you're breaking up that mycorrhizal fungi that is such an important piece of the base of
Right.
it.
And it also oxidizes nutrients in the soil really quickly. And I have a theory, a personal theory, that landscape contractors love to till and dig up the soil because one, it's satisfying and it makes it look like we're really doing something, but also because it gets this fast flush of nutrients oxidizing all at once. And then the plants go, holy crap, and everybody starts leafing out. And then the soil is depleted of those nutrients. And the plants are going, hey man, where to go? Like, and everybody looks really, really good immediately for the first couple weeks or months. And then over time, you're working to catch up to that damage.
Okay, so we've got a few minutes left. There are a couple things that basically relate back to how do you uncompact compacted soil, or how do you get it to a healthy point again, whether it's because it is in a new build in a backyard, or you have had people driving over it, or you've just, bought a house
Yeah.
one time that had 2 inches of rock over thick
Yeah.
plastic for
Yes.
about 40 years.
Yes.
Ugh.
I
It takes,
saw, yeah, so I saw a presentation years ago, and somebody had done this kind of case study on a sensitive site where they had this really important old grove of trees that was failing. And before the client, I can't remember what kind of client it was, but it was like all these trees in this big grove. Before they just gave up and said, oh, they're old and tear them down or whatever, they decided to try something. And what they did is they got an auger. So it's like that big bulb planter thing, like in a really huge drill. And they augered out columns and took the soil out, which allows that column now allows more air to go through and stuff like that. And then they filled the columns with compost. It was super compacted. And so they auger out like a pocket, and they stuffed the compost into the pocket, and then they did that on a grid like every 18 inches or every 24 inches, which was minimally invasive for the existing root systems of these trees. They're not rototilling. They're just injecting, if you will, compost, organic matter into the soil. And they said it worked wonders. I want to get back to the compost tea thing. That was the thread I lost. So compost tea, I'm not the expert. My understanding, however limited, is that it's providing a lot of nutrients that are pre-dissolved. So that's great, that's lovely, but that's not necessarily feeding the soil. And I think, I'm not sure, I think it could leach out with further applications of water. So you've done a lot of work. It might get up into the plant and be beneficial, but I don't think you're necessarily feeding the soil like we've been talking about. You're more kind of taking pre-digested juice and giving it that instead of a meal, if that makes sense. That's gross, but that,
you can make your own compost tea, and you can kind of work with where you are and what you've
sure.
got. So if you're going to do that, yeah, I wasn't recommending a powdered version.
Yeah, I mean, you can make your own compost tea. I just think it's easier to spread a little compost and like not.
Mm,
But
yeah.
there's also places that will sell you compost tea. There's places that will sell you that gunk that you get from vermiculture with the worms. Um, yeah.
And okay, so we've got just a moment left. If we don't get to everything,
Yep.
and we won't get to everything because we can't get to everything,
Nice.
it's continuing to grow. This is being recorded. It is going to be sent out in a few days with links to a bunch of resources. And I was very bright and put my email in here, so you all have it. And if not, you can reach out to me. I probably
Yep.
won't know the answer. That's usually the reality. I will know who knows the answer, usually.
But
So
Ann, she knows how to get hold of me too. So if she doesn't know the answer, we might know somebody who does or have a resource or something.
yeah, and we were both really lucky that we were trained by a really good soil scientist
Yeah,
that we
we miss
still
him.
miss. Yeah,
Yeah,
Will.
we miss him.
Will was a great soil scientist.
Yeah.
So we're not going to get to a bunch of the other stuff. If we didn't though, and you've got a specific question, feel free to reach out. Next month, we're going Naturehood. It's always the same first Thursday, 5:30. Next month is on the reality of a garden through the seasons, and particularly looking at fall. What does a fall garden look like when it's not the summer garden or the spring garden that everybody's picturing? And how do you make it attractive, and how do you enjoy it? So we will see you
Yeah.
all next month, and the recording will be back soon.
Yep.
Thanks.
Fabulous.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you.